Hello, everybody. My name is John Stuckey. I appreciate everybody joining. Welcome to the year-end closing process for Dynamics GP. As we get underway, we'll get started here. A couple of housekeeping notes, kind of logistical things. We still might have another participant or two join as we've gotten underway. We are recording this. You probably just heard the little notice there. If anybody would like a copy of this recording, just put your email out there into the Q&A section, and we'll be glad to try to get that going. If you have questions or comments during the presentation here, again, use the Q&A section. Right? Use Q&A to do that. David Beatty is online with me as well from Trinsoft. He'll be helping to monitor that. Be sure to make me aware, and I'll be sure to answer everybody's questions as we go along. So a couple things also just to make this as easy as possible. If you don't mind, to try to keep phones and things muted so we limit some background noise and anything there. Again, I'll be also, in addition to the recording, I'll be happy to provide a copy of the slide deck as well. And I've got some additional resources at the end that has a URL or a link or two. Might find that valuable. All right, as we get through that stuff, let's get going on our session. So let's talk about the agenda today and what we've got. First, we'll do a little bit of our introduction. Let me see here as we get going. All right, our agenda will have, we'll talk a little bit about Trinsoft, who we are. Be glad to introduce everybody and our background, our company, and our services. And then we're going to go through the steps, both pre-close steps, the general overview, and some highlights of the individual modules and the steps that it takes to close those. Again, today is about Dynamics GP, which is the legacy Great Plains product. This is not the BC or Business Central close process. We've got other sessions and other content that cover the process to do the close for BC. So today we're talking about GP. And of course, I'm available for any questions if there's any comments or questions about, hey, what's next? And we'll cover a little bit of the timeline of GP as well as we get going. All right. First up, a little bit of our background, right? Who are we? What have we done? Who is Trinsoft? We are a organization of business people. We come from a diverse background. Trinsoft has been around nearly 30 years. We'll celebrate 30 years next year. And we are everything Dynamics. We are a gold certified Microsoft partner. We're one of only a handful of direct license providers. Again, there are a couple of ways that you can secure your ERP licenses from Microsoft. And the most common model is indirect, where a lot of partners like us will sell through another third party like Ingram Micro or something like that. We are one of the few companies, again, only a handful in the United States, that actually sell the licenses direct. So there's nobody in between us and Microsoft in providing those licenses. We're a top 100 VAR by counting today, and we've got hundreds of clients all over North America. Again, one of the things that differentiates us a little bit is that we tend to have business people and teach them the technology. So, we've got CPAs and business degrees and accountants on staff. We tend to apply that approach to our consulting and technical team, as opposed to hiring technical or IT individuals and trying to teach them accounting and the technology. We found that a little bit better. Now, we also have a full force and group of developers that are available to customize and tailor GP and our solutions that can really help it meet some of the unique needs of a lot of our clients. All right, some of the services that we provide. As I said, it's pretty much all things Dynamics. ERP installations, migrations, project management. Our comprehensive range of services includes all of those things, including customization, training, ongoing support. We take a holistic approach to technology. We have the mindset that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. We balance technology against feasibility to make sure that solutions and workflows are effective and feasible in the organizations that we work with. So there isn't much about Dynamics that you'll come across in GP or the Business Central world that frankly we haven't come across or that we haven't worked with. We've been using GP since the mid 90s. We've been using NAV or the BC products since 1998. So both of them more than 25 years, and we're pretty comfortable with those products and anything that you might come across. All right, that's us. That's a little bit of background. Again, my name is John Stuckey, one of the principals here at TrendSoft. So now we'll get into a little bit as to the process. What are some of the steps that it takes to close the year successfully on Dynamics GP? All right, first up, make sure that all of your invoices, right, batches, fixed assets, et cetera, are posted. Before you do that, you got to be sure to get through these pre-close steps. So these are steps you want to do before you actually start the closing of your modules. So make sure that that's done. Next up, make sure you have performed a quick review of your account types. I'm going to show you a screen of what that is. As you go through the close process for General Ledger, what that process will do, it is a traditional accounting close, right? For those of you familiar with accounting, as we're closing the nominal accounts, right? And we're rolling those into the permanent accounts, the nominal or the income statement, right? The profit and loss accounts. You set up those account types, and we'll show you that. And one of the biggest things we see is people add or change an account during the year. They may have the wrong account type configured. And it, of course, if that's the case, it will close unexpectedly, right? If it's set up as a balance sheet account and it should be an income statement account, right? The system won't close it. It'll leave that open. It will think that that's a permanent account instead of a nominal. So that's one of the first things to check before you do it. So make sure you've got those cleaned up. I can't stress this enough of checking that. It's very simple. It's easy, and it'll save you a lot of headache. If it doesn't close those out, you have to redo it and go through some extra steps. All right, let's see what else we got here. Once you reviewed account setup, it's time to take a look at the new fiscal year, right? I don't believe you have to technically do this before you close, but this is the recommended order to go ahead and be sure that your next fiscal year is set up before closing the current fiscal year. So it's a good process to go ahead and do that. Save some key reports. That's not a bad idea to save key reports, some key financial data, some key metrics. We also strongly recommend you make a backup. I think I've got a separate slide or a recommendation on that as we get to the general ledger steps. So, save some key reports, get ready for the process. Everybody, almost all of our clients running Dynamics GP also use third-party solutions, also called add-ons or ISV type solutions. Examples of those might be Green Shades or McCorma or E1. There are numerous ones. One of the greatest benefits of GP is that there's a very rich third-party and add-on environment and culture out there. A lot of clients have them. And one of the things then you have to do when you're closing your solution on Dynamics GP is make sure that those third parties are up to date, that they're in good shape as well. They may have their own close process. I'm covering the base GP product only. If you have a product that requires its own closing steps, maybe the advanced project management or something like that, or warehouse, you have to be sure to follow their steps as well. And sometimes that'll include making sure that you've got the latest update and then going through their steps. So take a look at your third-party requirements as well as you get going. I mentioned backup, always a good idea, right? To make or take a backup prior to starting the process and be sure that you keep that. Work with your IT team. I won't go on my soapbox too long at this point, but not only do I believe you should make a backup prior to starting this process, I think you should test your IT team a little bit. It's a really good time of year to have them do a test restore. I'm a big advocate of doing test restores at least 2 or 3 times a year. Every time I've ever asked an IT team if you have a backup, what do they say? Yes, of course we do. Oh yes, we got it. We got a backup. But it doesn't count until you need it in the restore. And you'd be surprised how many times we've had IT groups and teams try to restore something and they weren't able to. So in our mind, make a good backup, key a little transaction, and then see if your IT team can restore it and make sure that that whole process works successfully. If you can't restore it, don't have a backup. All right, and then run through the close on a test company. Just a good general practice to be sure, because the process is making entries and closing out these accounts. Not a bad idea to use a test company. A lot of our clients have separate environments there, a production environment as well as a test environment. So go ahead and run through the process the first time in the test environment just to be sure you don't have any surprises and it's what you expected. I think that's a good setup for the pre-close as we get going. All right, now some of those actual steps. We mentioned the account maintenance window, and what I said was one of the number one things you'll see is being sure that that account type is correct. Here's the screenshot, how you can navigate to that, right? You can run it off of your smart list, right? Once you look at the account card and that account maintenance window, notice the posting type. We've highlighted there in the middle left side so you can see it right here, right? That's what will dictate how that account will close. Balance sheet account will remain open, right? A profit and loss account will be closed and will be closed to the balance sheet, to the retained earnings account. I'm going to show you a shot of that. I'm going to show you what that looks like as well, based on the settings in this window. So this is the one you want to check. Good idea to keep a log of those accounts you've created throughout the year. It's usually not very practical to look at every single one individually. So ideally, you've got a log of accounts that have been created. Double check this posting type when you on the account maintenance window before you get into your close. I think you can export accounts and export that setting too, if you don't have a log of what you created. All right. In addition, the next step was to create the fiscal period setup, right? And here you can see kind of the steps, right? Enter your year, first day and last day of that year, and then simply fill out the number of periods. You then generate or calculate. That will create those periods. It's going to create them with the name there, like you see in the screenshot example. It will create them, period 1, period 2, etc. You can click into that. There's a little tip we've got for you there. You can click into that and overwrite that, right? If you'd rather have, I would rather have January, February, March. So you can overwrite those period names so that it makes a little more sense to you. And remember, I don't believe you have to do this technically before closing, but this is the recommended order. So, it's a good idea to go ahead and set up your next fiscal year before you close the existing. All right. Let's see here, see if we got any questions. Chugging along good. Next up. All right, let's get into the close process now, right? What are the steps to close the individual modules? As you begin, it's important to note the order of closing the various modules. You do want to try to follow that order. At a minimum, the first thing to remember or to know is that you need to close all the sub-modules before you close general ledger. Ideally in the following order too. Now, the reason the close order can matter is because how the modules may flow into each other, right? So you might have modules or a closing process that flows into inventory, and then inventory may flow into GL. So the order does matter, and I'd encourage you to follow this order. If you use this order and you close modules first, right, everything should go smoothly for you. Again, note if you don't use a specific modular area, right? A lot of our GP clients don't use inventory. Well, you don't have to worry about it. There's no closing steps if you don't use the module. If you use an outside payroll service, there's no closing. The payroll steps here are only if you are using the native GP payroll, right? There's no close process needed if you're running an outside payroll provider and bringing in the GL entry, right? So these are only if you're using the native module and then close them in this order. All right, for those of you using native payroll, right, there are several steps to do that. Again, we don't have a lot of clients running native payroll in GP any longer, but there could be a few of you out there. And payroll traditionally was a very robust and strong module of GP. So a couple of things that you do. It's its own separate module. It has its own closing process, right? And when you're closing these modules, performance of your system could be impacted. So take that into account and ideally execute the closing process as close to after hours, if not actually doing it during after hours as possible. It's important that you first complete, of course, all payrolls for the year, right? Make sure that your payrolls are done, they're posted, they're complete. When you're done with that, you'll create the year-end file that you can use to create your W-2s, right? Ideally, you've got your W-2s ready. Those W-2 reports can be processed manually, or a lot of our clients use an outside service called Green Shades to help both with 1099s and electronic filing for W-2s. We encourage you to follow any extra time and test the payroll prior to doing the close. All right, first step then, be sure that you get the update. The latest update for the current year needs to be implemented on payroll. That's first, right? It can be done prior to doing GF, should be done prior to doing general ledger. It's similar to applying a service pack, pretty straightforward. And then that close process will create your year-end file. Allow a little extra time to test and execute your first payroll of next year. That's just a tip as we go ahead. All right, on the W-2s, as you see there, first step, let's just kind of talking about it. Be sure that that you have the latest payroll tax update running. As you see there, that you'll want to get the latest tax update for 2025. Go through your last run, all these close steps, then install the updates for 26. We have had some clients in the past where they skipped that and they just grabbed the most recent update, which could be the one for next year, right? 2026, and they installed that prior to executing their close steps for 25. You don't want to do that, right? Go in order here. Follow the latest update for 2025 first, then go through the steps, right? Complete all the pay runs, complete the month, period, quarter end processes and reports you may need, right? Get the update installed, create that year-end file, which creates the data set needed for W-2s. Only then are you ready to proceed to get ready for 26, which includes installing a 2026 specific update, which usually doesn't come out until the very end of December there, and then close fiscal periods for the payroll service. Getting ahead of myself a little bit on the slides here. There's a little bit of a delay, but I hadn't clicked them there, so let those catch up so you can see them. All right. That's the process for payroll to get it running. First close area, first close module that you need to do, right, to get ready to close up all of your Dynamics GP. Next up is inventory. Again, not used by a lot of clients with us on GP, but if you've got it, it's an important and structured close process here to be sure that you wrap up and get the costing correct. So here you can take a look at what the steps are. All right. So before you do that, be sure all inventory related transactions, of course, have been posted. That's true of all these modules. You may have those lingering transactions out there in batches or potentially in other areas. It's important that you go through those and make sure that all of your transactions in an area are processed for the year, of course, before you go through the close. Once those final transactions are posted, you're ready to perform the close routine for the module. A little bit of an update of what's going to happen, right? When you run the close process for inventory, this routine, it will close and then transfer all summarized current year quantity, cost and sales amount to the transaction history for items for which you've been keeping a summarized sales history. So again, if you're using inventory and you're looking at those sales history windows from the item maintenance area, right, that this close process is what's updating the amounts and updating the values for year to date. The quantity sold field for each item is reset to zero. The close process also updates the quantity in each item's beginning quantity field to the quantity on hand for each site. So it rolls and updates all your quantity on hand and dollar amounts and quantity sold amounts. Finally, there's an option when performing the close to clean up discontinued items and lot attributes for items that have been completely sold out, right? If you don't have none on stock, it will prompt you. You have the ability to go ahead and wipe or clear some of that stuff out. These are check boxes that the user has the option to enable prior to running the close process. All right, and then the last step, right? It's important for users to note there is not a year-end close report in inventory, right? In this module, when it closes, it updates those quantities and amounts like I described. So if there are any specific inventory related reports that you want to save, it's an important time to capture those and go ahead and run them. And then as with the payroll module and other areas, the last optional step is to close the fiscal periods for this module. And it's one of the only modules that has their own fiscal periods. Inventory, payroll, and GL are kind of the three areas where we are managing periods. By doing this in inventory, it will prevent any users from mistakenly posting inventory in the wrong period. All right, let's see what's next here. Inventory. Now it gets pretty straightforward as we get into some of the core modules. Post all transactions and batches for the current year. As I mentioned previously, that's pretty much a good solid first step for all of the modules that you are processing. Second, reconcile the customer trial balance. The customer and the historical customer trial balance specifically are what you should use to be sure that that's reconciled and reconciled completely to your GL. You want to make sure that the reconciliation is done before you do the close. Makes it much, much cleaner, you can imagine. A couple of items that get updated. When you run the close process in receivables, It's going to clear year-to-date finance charges. Again, it's related to some of those lookups and some of those totals that you're displaying when you look at a customer's information. The smart list objects are cleared and receivable summary reports. In addition, you want to close fiscal periods for sales to ensure that transactions are not posted in different periods. You want to be sure that you line that process up. So payables is very similar. Receivables and payables almost mimic each other. We'll take a look at payables in just a minute. The primary thing that the close process is doing in these submodules, it's putting anything into the GL that's needed, which there isn't much in receivables and payables, but then it's updating as we're showing you, it's updating some of those amounts that are referenceable from the maintenance windows. All right, on to payables. Just like receivables, very similar process. What payables has additional is 1099s, which we'll talk about. First up, just like before, post all the transactions in batches for the current year in your payables module, and then fully reconcile the vendor trial balance. Again, I'm a fan of the historical vendor trial balance, which lets you run it after the fact, and to me, a little bit easier to reconcile to the GL. Be sure that your GL and those reports are fully reconciled before proceeding. Makes it much, much easier. Just like receivables, when you run the payables close process, the primary thing that is happening is that it's updating some of the totaling, right? It's updating the amount since the last close, smart list objects, etc. So payables and receivables are very, very similar. And then, getting ahead of myself a little bit. And then just like before, be sure to close the fiscal periods so that it's not possible for users to post into the wrong period when using the payables module. And for those of you closing too, you know from probably your month closing process, you have the ability to manage which modules are being closed to keep your other users out of them while you're reconciling and doing this first place. What you want to do as soon as you make sure that the last transactions are entered, go ahead and checkbox those modules as closed so you don't have users accidentally posting or creating transactions that you're not aware of. All right, let's talk a little about 1099s. 1099s, most people who start to think about payables and the year-end process for payables think in 1099s. Technically, though, 1099s are not part of the close process. These are not related to it. You do not have to run 1099s or execute the 1099 process around closing payables or before or after, right? You can run 1099s after the fact. Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about 1099s though, because it's certainly a big part of the year-end process, and most people consider it relatively synonymous with their payables process. All right, 1099s can be printed manually or can be exported and managed through a third party. Our preferred third party for this kind of thing is Green Shades. I think a lot of our clients use them, but you certainly don't have to. And as a matter of fact, there's a new feature, I believe, with 18.6. I might have that version wrong. You can print 1099s with lines. I have a little more for you at the end here and related information and additional information that I'll show you that. So you really don't even have to order forms anymore. Now, I believe universally everybody has to file 1099s electronically. There is not an automated integration for the 1099 electronic filing, so be aware of that. GP, of course, does support the different 1099 forms, and whenever that was a few years ago, where they rolled up the new type instead of MIS, right, is now the NEC version and the different boxes. I believe there are some new rules even this year about what gets reported in what box. I think something about comp or golden parachute comp, I think goes in a separate box. Again, we are not dedicated 1099 experts, but we do have a pretty good handle on the rules. And as I said, a little bit later, I'll show you some resources that will help. Be sure, to make your 1099 process a little easier, the first step is in following a good checklist and onboarding your vendors. You really want to make sure that a W-9 is secured and that you check the appropriate 1099 setup information on the vendor maintenance window before you make your first payment to a vendor. So now, good news is if you set it up after the fact, you can manually edit the 1099 amounts. So that's the good news. You can manually edit 1099 amounts if needed. That's under you see the link there, purchasing cards and 1099 details. And then to print, to get the information for your 1099s, that's located under routines. Don't ask me why. And that's not under the reports list. It's under the routines. If you got under routines, you'll see the 1099 and 1099 data available there. All right, here's the maintenance window. So first up, when you're onboarding the new vendor, make sure that they're set up correctly. You should obtain, it's a good best practice to obtain the W-9 from them before you process the first invoice, definitely before the first payment. Remember that 1099s are payment specific. It's not the date of the invoice, it's the date of the payment technically that you are reporting on. And 1099s are calendar basis for everybody, regardless of when your fiscal year is. Here you can see on the vendor maintenance window, the tax type setting and the 1099 box. That's the default. I believe those are editable transaction by transaction. If you do have the kind of a unique situation, a little bit more of a rare situation when a vendor may get more than one 1099 from you, that is supported as well. And then here's the 1099 details window. So this details window is what is used if you need to edit the details, right? Edit the dollar amount. So let's say that you had a new vendor, you set them up during 25. For whatever reason, their first couple of checks got cut before you marked them as subject to 1099, right? In that case, the details for that non-employee compensation will not include those first couple of payments. As a result, you would need to go in and manually edit the dollar amount. And this is the screen you do it, right? It's on 1099 details window, retrieve the vendor, notice the tax type, and then you can simply click right into that field and you can edit that 10,000 to whatever the appropriate number is. There's no reconciliation. There's no other process. So this area should be secured through permissions. You don't want other users doing it, but boy, it's a lifesaver. We've all got a vendor too that didn't get on board right or something happened. And this is really nice to be able to go in there and just manually override the 1099 amounts. But again, you're on your own doing that, right? As far as reconciling those and being able to confirm the amount that you submit. And then the last piece is the print 1099 window. We'll show you that piece as well. As I mentioned, a lot of our clients use a third party there, Green Shades or some other to help, especially with the electronic filing. There is no direct electronic filing mechanism from Dynamics GP to the IRS. Here you can see on the print, you can see the payer's federal ID number, right? The year that you want, the type that you're running, and out they go. All right. That's it for 1099s. As I said, you do not, the other big thing to remember, the big news, you do not have to run the 1099 processes or have them done before you close your fiscal year. 1099s, I believe, are due to the recipients by the end of January and the government filing due by the end of February. Again, I may be off about that. I'm not a 1099 expert, but I believe that those are the correct dates. All right, next functional area, going back to the close step, the module to be closed following our order of closing modules prior to closing the year in the GL is fixed assets, right? And notice that the order does matter here. Payables needs to be closed prior to fixed assets. Just like the others, be sure that you've posted any fixed asset related transactions. Make sure that the asset depreciation has been run and is current, prior to running, right? If you haven't run your December depreciation, you probably don't need to, not ready to close yet. But notice the payables need to be closed first. If you have multiple fixed asset books, you can close them each separately, but each must be closed. All books must be closed prior to going to GL. Even, and this is a good reminder, if you're keeping multiple books, the reason is typically you might be one of those adventurous people keeping up with your tax depreciation. Again, we're mixed. We have a lot of clients who do that. If you're keeping tax and separate depreciation books, they all must be closed before GL. You can't just close the company book and say, oh, the Fed and Kentucky tax don't matter. They're all depreciation books for a year must be closed before you go on to the GL. Prior to closing the fixed asset module, be sure to post any transactions, right? We know that. And again, the closing process, right? It's going to update in a similar manner to the other modules. It's going to update a lot of your year-to-date totals, right? It's going to update the year-to-date fields in the current year, the cost, the life-to-date depreciation, all of those amounts will be updated, including reserves, salvage values, et cetera. And then the last piece is to update the fiscal year, right? Be sure you update the fiscal year. And then the last piece is your year-end reports. Remember, if you're reconciling anything or you want fixed asset detail for the current year, to get that reporting before you do the close process for that module, right? That's pretty similar to the others. Okay, I think this is the last module we're closing. Analytical accounting. Again, not super heavily used. If you've got divisions or functional areas where you're utilizing analytical accounting, especially for reporting, you do want to consider this. There's no separate year-end process, but you will be prompted. That second bullet is really what it's all about. The first time you do the close on a newer version, from the GL side, it's going to prompt you, and it sees you're using analytical accounting. It's going to prompt you to move that to history, right? So verify the settings in the analytical accounting option window and be sure that that's configured properly. You don't want the history move or that process to surprise you with anything. So those of you that are using that, be sure that you take that into account prior to moving forward. Okay, once we've finished the modules, we're ready to close the general ledger. The whole process, this sounds more tedious than it is, right? These steps are actually pretty straightforward and can be done in a fairly short amount of time. As we have said several times today, be sure that you close all other modules first, right? Get those done. Once that's done, all right, the next step, check those account types, right? I emphasized that pretty early. I'm going to emphasize again, this is the number one thing people will run into doing a close. They're going to run through it, and one of their new income statement accounts was left open, and the reason virtually every time, right? The reason is that posting type field we showed you in the account maintenance window. So be sure to check that piece up. Make a backup, right? Or as I said before, test to restore as well. Be sure to get a backup and a restore. It's a really good time of year to make sure that you can restore successfully. It will also give you a good sense of how long it takes to do that, right? Again, IT, and I'm not picking on IT, right? They're our best friends, and without them, these systems wouldn't work. But they may be able to restore, but it might take 2 days, and even that would be good to know, right? Good to know if it's going to take that long. So it's a really good time of year to make sure that you understand that process. You've got your arms around the validity of the backup and restore process, and that it works as you'd expect. Much better to find that out on your terms than on somebody else's due to a crash or some other kind of catastrophe. So make a backup and test your restore. All right, check the GL setup. Be sure to verify settings in the GL setup window. We'll take a look at that. I think we got a screenshot of that window. As you execute the close process, right, here's what's happening. As I called it, I referred to it earlier as a traditional accounting close. For those of you who are accountants or have an accounting background, hopefully know what I mean there. It's moving your income statement into retained earnings, right? The general ledger close process in accounting closes out nominal or temporary accounts, the income statement accounts. It sums them all up and it nets them into the retained earnings account. That's the essence of it, right? It brings the balance sheet forward, so your beginning balance, net transaction, net change, ending balance are correct, but ultimately it's closing the income statement into that. And then the last piece, the year's being marked as historical, right? So it's not an active year anymore. Once you're done there, make sure to save year-end close reports, right? Base set of financials, anything that you might do at year-end with regards to financial reporting or reporting books, corporate ledgers, things like that you have from a document retention process as well. All right. And then the last thing, if you're rolling the period, we created the new fiscal period. So now that we've closed it, right, what we would want to do is mark those periods as closed as well, right? We don't want anybody, once I've closed 25, I don't want anybody else posting to 25. So it's important to flag those periods as closed too. All right, there's the GL setup window. So we had a screenshot of that so we could take a look at what things to keep an eye on there, right? Now, the thing that you're looking at on the setup window is how to close the income statement. Notice the little checkbox there, close to divisional. Usually that is not checked. And with that not checked, the entire net sum of your income statement is going to go into the account selected there. right? In this case, 000, 30, 30, 00. The entire net of your income statement will go there. If you click the checkbox next to close divisional accounts, you will be required to select which segment contains your division in that box to the right. Let's say that our divisions are the last two-digit segment in our example here. When I click close to divisional segments, the lookup on the right will require me to pick that. I'll pick a division, which is my last segment. When that setup is made in this window, the income statement will be closed by unique division value. In this case, the little 00 at the end. Maybe I have three values or four values there, 00, 01, 02, 03, right? What the income statement close will do is it's going to close them out by divisional value, and it's going to post four entries into your retained earnings. One for 00, one for 01, one for 02, one for 03. That's what that means. It's going to close, it's going to break down retained earnings by a divisional or a segment that you pick. Why would you do that? If you're managing intercompany or divisional by inside one database, remember two ways to manage intercompany, one database, two. If you're doing it inside one database, a divisional close is pretty common because you'd want that retained earnings broken down. Right? That's what that is. So it's important that that's set up right. If you don't check that, it will lump everything into 01, and then you would have to do manual entries of some kind, right, to reclass that into your divisional breakdown. So that's the thing you're looking for on the setup window. Then closing the year, right? When you go into year-end closing, you, of course, have the retained earnings account, and then you can see that you have your remove unused segment numbers and maintain inactive accounts, right? If you have some accounts out there that aren't being used, right, it has the ability to help automate the maintenance or disabling those accounts through the close process. Close the year. Now, if you made a mistake, so that's it, right? We go back one, you can see that's it. We're done after we hit close year. Once we go forward, if we made a mistake, right, what do we do in a prior period adjustment? In this case, it's reverse historical year, right? You have two choices. If you have closed the year and maybe it's audit adjustments, or maybe you found a transaction that we didn't post, we didn't get in there before we did the close, you really have two choices. You can reverse the historical year, which will effectively reopen that, and you can get your transaction in. The other option is to create a traditional, what's called a prior period adjustment. A prior period adjustment would simply post any income statement element of the transaction directly to retained earnings. That is still an option as well. Those are your two choices. If that happens, you're right. If you're going to reverse the historical year, right, you go ahead and hit that. Then that will make the necessary updates, and then you would go back through and close again. Right. So those are the steps. That's it. That's your process for going through the close on GP. Again, a lot of steps, you know, kind of wordy in describing all of that, but you'll see that process, depending on the company size, doesn't take too terribly long. For those of you that have a lot of transactions, heavy volume, right, it could take a little while. Be sure to do this for every company. Remember, every individual database company, these steps that I just went through has to be done for each company. Now, that's each database company. Remember, if you're managing your companies inside one database through a segment, hey, doing it one time will work. But if you have to log out, if you have to pick company, if you have to log out and log into each company, you have to do the close process I just reviewed for every company individually. Okay, so be sure to do that. Okay, this last slide too, which would be worth getting a copy of the slides. This is a great resource. There's a blog maintained by a Microsoft team member. Her name is Terry Healy. She's a terrific resource for this step and for these process. She covers all of the closing processes in detail, including a lot of different steps and things to do and things to know about 1099s. So strongly encourage you to check her out. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can show you here. Here it is. So hopefully you're seeing my screen there, and you can see this is her blog, and you saw back on the slideshow, which I'll pull up in just a minute. I've got a link to it there so that you'll be able to see it. But this is a fantastic blog, and she has a lot of details, not only about how to do things in GP and the right steps and the right order right, to do them in, but also just good, regulatory information about the rules. If as I scroll down here, you should be able to see the individual blog posts that she has on details of every functional module, step by step, how to go through it. If we take a look at her payables module area, you'll be able to see the amount of detail that she has in here. Hopefully this will pop open for me quick enough. I know there's a little bit of a delay, but you should be seeing that, right? A lot of good information in here, as you can see, on 1099s and what to do with links step by step, how to handle it in Dynamics GP, again, including some of the regulatory stuff. So a very, very handy area there on her blog. I think it's a terrific resource, and I would strongly encourage you to take a look at this. You can search for it by going to community.dynamics.blog, searching for Terry Healy or year-end checklist, Dynamics GP, things like that. Should be able to find it. As I said, I've got let me get back to it here. I've got the link right here on the slides. You can see the URL there above, and then I've got an active link that should be available to you if you get a copy of the deck. So that really is a good beneficial resource for you as you try to figure out, how to process or do some of the steps. I think she's a great resource and puts out a lot of terrific content. And the nice thing about Terry, she's a Microsoft team member, so she isn't selling you anything. She isn't out there trying to get you dues and add-on. She's telling you really how to leverage, your investment there in GP and what steps you may need to take. So I wanted you to have access to it. Well, everybody, I appreciate your time today. That covers the steps we wanted to cover on closing the year in Dynamics GP. I'll pause for a few minutes here, and I got another slide or two after this to see if anybody has any questions. If you do, remember to hit that Q&A area in your interface here on Zoom, and David will help me out, and we'll take a look at it and see if we've got any. I don't see any open questions at this time, but if you got a few minutes or you got something on your mind, please go ahead and hit that. While we process those, I'll go ahead and jump into the next thing. Just the reminder to everybody, last year, Microsoft did make that announcement about the life and an ultimate time frame for Dynamics GP. This is it. So you can see it just for if anybody wasn't sure, kind of not sure what to go. Couple things to keep in mind that, they will be winding down new customers and new information, new license type things in the year ahead. So if you're thinking about riding out a little bit with GP, and if you want to do that, that's okay. It's not going anywhere, and neither is Trinsoft. We'll be here to support you. We'll be here to help you. But keep in mind about your licenses and make sure you've got licenses that will last you a little while. 2029 is the last official end of support. Product enhancement stops, and then 31 is when security updates and hotfixes end. So there's several years to go. For those of you that do want to talk about what's next, the Dynamics BC is the product. You can start talking about that. We've got a white paper on steps and things to consider. We're happy to have that discussion, but we're happy to keep you and support you and take care of you on GP too. That's yours. It's your investment. We're here to help you make good decision, whatever you choose. As you go forward, remember, start planning now. Think ahead a little bit. Remember to do this on a trial or test environment. Check out Microsoft's documentation, especially those links there from Terry. If you have any questions with us, you can email support@trinsoft.com. We'll be happy to help you. And of course, we've got content on our YouTube channel and blog and website as well. So a last call here for any questions before we wind it down. I think that's all we've got for today's session. As always, we appreciate your trust in Trinsoft. We appreciate your business. We want to be a resource for you to help you get the most out of this. So we appreciate your time today. If there are no other questions, that's it for us. I'll leave, let's see, last piece is how to contact me if anything else comes up after the fact. You're welcome to email or call me anytime. Appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar. Please let us know if you have any questions, and good luck going into a new year. Thanks again. Have a great day.